I still remember the feeling of dipping my toes into the stock market for the first time. My heart pounded like a drum, echoing in an empty hall. The room back then was tiny, just big enough for a rickety wooden desk, an old laptop, and a cold cup of coffee. But in my head, I saw a wide, straight road stretching out towards freedom. I'm not a risk taker. Or rather, I used to think I wasn't. My whole youth was spent doing exactly what I was told. Study engineering, work at a tech company for 10 years, wake up at 6:30 every morning, get to the office by 8 sharp, and leave at 5:30 in the afternoon. I did my job well, very well, even excelled at it. But nobody noticed. Then again, there wasn't really anything to notice. Maybe that's why I was haunted by the one moment I remember so clearly when my father, during a family dinner, put his knife down on the table and looked straight at me. He didn't yell, didn't insult me. He just said, very evenly, "You live like someone who just clings to safety, never taking risks, never making mistakes. And because of that, you'll never get anywhere." I didn't say anything back that day. I just sat there in silence. But I remember the chill down my spine, the dry, brittle silence between two men who should have been the closest people in each other's lives. From that moment on, a part of me just smoldered, an unspoken reminder. You have to prove something. Show him. Show the whole world. And so, I chose the stock market. I studied day and night. Documents, charts, technical analysis, market psychology. I devoured everything. Not out of passion, but because I thought this was the arena for people who dared. And I wanted to be seen as one of them. 9 months after I started, I pulled out my entire life savings, over $100,000, and transferred it into an investment account. I hid it from my wife, just telling her I was working on a personal project. She asked questions, but I brushed them off with reassurances like husbands often do when they don't want to be stopped. At first, everything went exactly as I'd hoped. I placed an order, and it went up, then up again. One tech stock tripled in just 3 weeks. I remember jumping out of my chair, slamming my hand on the desk, letting out a shout that startled my young son into tears. I ran into the kitchen, threw my arms around my wife, repeating over and over, "We did it, honey. We did it." Even though, at the time, she still didn't know exactly what we were doing. I started dreaming big. A house in the hills with a small vegetable garden out back. A pickup truck I always admired whenever I passed the dealership. One day, I'd invite my father over, open the liquor cabinet, pour 2 glasses, and say, "I did it, Dad." I wasn't bragging, but I felt I had reason to be proud. With every green day in the market, I felt closer to the man whose respect I craved. I thought I was fixing the image he had of me, a weak kid playing it safe, unwilling to gamble. I started sleeping less, staying up until 3 in the morning, tracking the Asian markets. I jotted down every number, every price fluctuation, as if it were a piece of music I needed to understand note by note. Coffee became my best friend. Dinner was usually takeout. My wife started to worry. She'd ask, "Are you sure everything's okay?" I'd nod, always nodding. I didn't want her to see me trembling. I didn't want anyone to see me trembling. I used to think that if I ever failed, I'd know when to stop. But pride wouldn't let me admit I was walking a tightrope over a bottomless abyss. I remember one evening very clearly. A steady rain falling outside. The only sounds in the room were the clicking of the mouse and the whir of the fan pulling air through the cracked window. I had just placed a huge buy order, a medical company rumored to be partnering with the government. I looked at the chart, and my heart hammered. Not out of fear, but because I believed that this time this would change my life. I sent a screenshot of the trade to an old friend, also a trader. He texted back, "You're crazy, Lucas. If this goes south, you'll lose everything." I didn't reply, just stared at the screen and whispered, "I have to make this work. I can't go back to being invisible. I can't." I didn't know what I was running from or where I was running towards. All I knew was that I was on a train with no return ticket. And I believed, with everything I had, that I would win. That my father would have to look at me differently. That I wouldn't just be a faded shadow after family dinners, after stories of other people's success. I didn't know, just a few weeks later, everything would vanish. Everything. But in that moment, sitting in the small room under the dim yellow light, the gentle rain like a lullaby, I believed I was touching the first peak of my life. And I was ready to risk it all to hold on to that feeling. I still remember the day things started to crack. The market opened red that day, but not the kind of red that sends immediate panic. It was more like a hairline fracture on a pane of glass, seemingly insignificant, but if you looked closely, you could see it spreading second by second. I pulled up the news sites, opened the charts, and sat up straight, as if being more serious would somehow make the stocks obey me. My heart beat unevenly, not out of fear, but because I knew. I knew I put too much in, and I knew this time there was no way back. In just 2 days, I lost over 40% of my portfolio, a number that left me stunned. I tried to laugh, that forced kind of laugh people use when they think they're still in control. But the cold sweat on my palms and the way sweat trickled down my spine in a room chilled to 65 degrees told me this wasn't just a minor correction. That night, I didn't eat. Natalie left my dinner in the microwave with a note stuck to it. Don't go to bed hungry. But I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I sat in the dark, lit only by the flickering screen, each long red candlestick like a deep wound that couldn't be stitched shut. I started holding on, meaning not selling, not cutting losses, meaning hoping, meaning telling myself, this is just temporary. The market will bounce back. I put in more orders, using money borrowed from my line of credit. A stupid decision. I knew it, but in that moment, you'll do anything to maintain the illusion that you still have some control. By the fifth day, the market dropped another 8%. I couldn't sleep. My eyes were bloodshot. Natalie asked me what was wrong. I said, nothing's wrong. Again, nothing's wrong. The phrase had become so familiar on my lips that I almost believed it myself. By the second week, my account was down to less than 20% of where I started. I stopped checking my balance on my phone. I just stared at the computer screen, as if looking long enough could somehow change things. I started getting irritable, slamming my hand on the desk, yelling at the monitor. I remember Natalie walking in once and finding me sitting there, breathing hard, my face pale. She asked frantically if I was okay. I waved her away, trying to pretend I was calm, but tears nearly escaped as she turned to leave. One Monday morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls from the bank on my phone. I knew what was coming. The margin account didn't have enough equity. They were calling to inform me they were liquidating my positions. I didn't answer. I couldn't bear to hear them say what I already knew. That afternoon, I looked at my account and saw the balance, $673. From over 100,000 down to less than 1,000. From the dream of freedom to a waking nightmare. I remember getting up, walking out of the house like a ghost. I walked through the neighborhood, past shops, cafes, people laughing, shopping, living their normal lives. Everything around me seemed to be happening in a different world, a world I no longer belonged to. I went into the restroom of a fast food joint, locked the door, and stared into the mirror. My face, it wasn't me anymore. It was a stranger. Eyes sunken, skin pale, lips dry and cracked. I put a hand on my stomach, feeling the emptiness. Not from hunger, but because there was nothing left inside me. 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks. And I'd lost everything. Lost the money, lost the confidence, lost the image I had of myself. I thought about my father, not with resentment, but with a chilling sadness. I had wanted to prove to him I wasn't weak. But now, I couldn't look in the mirror without seeing a true failure. When I got home, Natalie was sitting at the kitchen table. Her eyes weren't worried anymore. They were silent. A cold, decisive kind of silence. She didn't ask any more questions. I didn't say anything either. We ate dinner like two strangers sharing a table, in the same house, but universes apart. That night, I lay alone in the dark. Outside, the wind howled through the window frame. I listened to it like a reminder that the world kept spinning, even if I was shattering into pieces. I couldn't sleep. My head was filled with numbers, charts, the warning bells from the trading platform, the alert messages from the bank, playing over and over like a horror soundtrack with no stop button. Maybe the most painful thing wasn't losing the money. It was losing myself, losing the sense of who I was, that I could do something meaningful. And I didn't know yet that just a few days later, I would lose even more. Not in the market, but right here under my own roof. I think I was prepared for the financial losses, but I didn't know that what truly breaks a person isn't the numbers. It's the look in the eyes of someone who once loved you, as they decide to walk away. Natalie didn't make a scene. She was never the loud type. It all happened with a chilling quietness. That morning, I woke up and saw the suitcase by the front door. The silver gray suitcase, a wedding gift from years ago, now stuffed full. There was no argument. No tears. Just the sound of the zipper closing against the metal, dragging on like a cut in my heart. I asked, "Where are you going?" She turned to look at me. Her eyes weren't cold, not angry, just tired. Tired in the way people get when they've tried to hold on for too long. "I need to breathe, Lucas. Here, everything is suffocating me." I stood there, not knowing whether to hold her back or let her go. The house felt terribly cold, even though summer was setting in. I wanted to say I was trying, that I hadn't given up, but my mouth was dry, and only one sentence came out. "I'm sorry." She didn't answer. She just placed a stack of papers on the table, divorce papers already printed out, my name right there, stark and official. Next to it was a handwritten note. "The joint account, I took my share. The rest is yours." My share. I don't know what to call the feeling then. Numbness, bitterness, or maybe just emptiness. Like standing in the aftermath of a storm that swept everything away, and you're the only one left. She turned and walked out, leaving the house in shambles. Not the furniture, but the unspoken brokenness. I sat numbly on the sofa until dark. Didn't turn on the lights. Didn't eat. Didn't cry. Just sat. Every sound was muted except for the ticking wall clock, counting down the seconds until I completely fell apart. That evening, I checked my email, a meaningless habit by then, and saw a message from my father-in-law. Just one line. "I told you Natalie couldn't live with someone like you." Someone like you. That phrase lodged itself in my chest deeper than any market loss. I realized I hadn't just lost money, hadn't just lost my wife. I'd also lost the respect of the family, the people who once called me son. The next day, I called my mom. I just wanted to hear someone's voice tell me everything would be okay. But she said, very gently, "You have to learn to take responsibility for the choices you've made." And that was the first time in my life I felt truly alone. I didn't eat for 3 days, just drank water. At night, I tossed and turned, not from hunger, but because everything inside me kept replaying like a film stuck in reverse. Images of Natalie and me when we were young, moving into this little house, buying our first Christmas tree, all of it mocking me now. One night, I opened the closet and saw her wedding dress still hanging there in its garment bag. I don't know why she left it. Maybe by accident. Maybe on purpose. I touched the white fabric and realized my hand was shaking. I used to think if I lost all the money, I'd still have my family. But now, when I walked into the kitchen each morning, the chair beside mine was empty. When I went into the bedroom, her faint perfume was gone. The whole house felt like someone had sucked all the warmth out of it. I called a lawyer. Signed the divorce papers. No disputes. No lawsuits. Everything ended cleanly, as if the marriage never had cracks, just a contract dissolved because trust had expired. And then I left the house. I couldn't stay in a place where every corner reminded me that I had once been loved. I moved into a small rented room near the industrial park, a place where truck horns blared early each morning, where people didn't care who you were or what you'd lost. Every night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlight cast shadows on the cracked walls. And I wondered, was I paying the price for dreaming of proving something? I didn't know the answer, but I knew that dream had left me, and the person I once loved most had too. My first rented room was on the second floor of an old, rundown building, peeling paint on the walls, the hallways smelling of stale grease and old cigarettes. The room itself was maybe 200 square feet, with a single bed, a wobbly wooden table, and a small window overlooking a dusty parking lot. I remember the first time I dropped my bags on the floor, the first thing I did was just sit down and look around. Not to check the amenities, but just to see if I could still feel anything. But strangely, I didn't feel sad, didn't feel regret, just empty, as if every emotion had been scooped clean, leaving behind an empty shell named Lucas Carter. That first night there, I didn't turn on a light. Just opened the curtains to let the glow from the street lamp filter in. It cast pale yellow streaks on the wall, shifting slightly with the leaves outside the window. I sat with my back against the wall, staring into the darkness ahead. No tears, no sais, just nothing happening inside me anymore. I lived like that for days. Woke up early, walked to the nearby industrial parks, asked if they needed help. Most shook their heads. Some asked, "What did you do before?" And when I mentioned I was an engineer, that I traded stocks, they just nod like, "Your kind doesn't fit in here." I didn't blame them. Honestly, I was starting to believe it myself, that I didn't fit in anywhere. My meals were usually a cup of instant noodles, maybe an apple if I had one, and tap water. I started counting every remaining cent, calculating how long I could last before I had to leave even this miserable room. One time, digging through an old jacket pocket, I found a small photo. It was me and my dad when I was a teenager, standing beside him at a fishing lake. Both of us in plaid shirts, hair messy from the wind. I remembered I had just caught my first fish, and he had clapped me on the shoulder, the only time I clearly remember the feel of his hand there. I sat for hours looking at that photo, wondering, if Dad saw me now, what would he say? Would he be disappointed? Or would he nod, acknowledging that I'd tasted the price of trying to be a real man? That evening, I went into the bathroom, flipped on the light. The dim yellow bulb reflected my image in the mirror. I froze. I didn't recognize the man in the mirror anymore. My eyes were sunken, dark circles underneath, like I hadn't slept in years. Skin pale and dry, hair messy, growing unevenly. A graying stubble covered my face, as if there was no point in looking put together anymore. But what made me stop dead was the look in those eyes. Empty, lifeless. No light left. I stood there for a long time, hands gripping the edge of the sink. For a moment, I thought I might shatter the mirror. Not out of anger at anyone, but because I couldn't stand looking at myself. I didn't punch it, but I whispered, so quietly, "Who are you, Lucas?" That question echoed in my head for many nights after. No one answered. No echo came back. Just the sound of the wind whistling through the window cracks, and the old fridge groaning whenever it kicked on. One day, while it was raining, I sat huddled by the window, watching the drops hit the glass. My mind replayed the past days, the trades, the family gatherings, the look in Natalie's eyes as she left, my father-in-law's email, my mother's words. Everything looped like a tape stuck in rewind. I turned on the old laptop, not to look at stocks, but to search for jobs. Any job, cleaning warehouses, washing cars, carrying boxes. I didn't have choices anymore. I just wanted to do something, anything, to stop feeling like I was slowly disappearing. But even that wasn't easy. One afternoon, coming back after walking miles all day, I collapsed onto the floor of my room. My raincoat torn, hair soaked, shoes muddy. I opened my bag, took out the old photo, and for the first time in months, tears fell. I cried, not sobbing uncontrollably, but the kind of tears that just spill out, as if my body was finally admitting it was tired, hurting, and had lost more than it ever thought it could bear. I don't know how long after that I fell asleep, but I remember that moment clearly, the moment I finally stopped trying to be strong. I was just a man, an exhausted body, sitting in a cold, rented room, facing myself, with nothing left to lose and no one left to prove anything to. And right there, in that place that felt devoid of hope, something very small began to shift. I couldn't name it yet. I just knew for the first time in weeks I felt alive, even if it was just a faint breath, even if it was just in the darkness. It was a Saturday, the kind of muggy, midsummer day with scorching sun, but I still wore my old jacket to hide the stains on the t-shirt underneath. I walked from my room to the flea market at the end of the street, where people gathered every weekend, selling everything from old records to broken appliances. Everyone there carried a story, even if they didn't tell it. I was walking aimlessly, not buying, not selling, just walking, as if my feet might lead me somewhere the pain couldn't reach. But really I was escaping the moldy walls, the hum of the fridge reminding me I was existing but not living. Amidst the noisy crowd, I heard a voice. Deep, warm, and very calm. Not a vendor's pitch. Not someone haggling. It was someone talking about God. I turned my head. In a small corner near an old truck, a man stood on an overturned wooden crate. He wore a faded white shirt, holding a worn, leather-bound Bible. No microphone. No stage. Just him and a few people standing quietly around, listening. I hadn't planned to stop. I'd never been religious. Growing up, we had a Bible, but it collected dust. My mom prayed sometimes, but my dad just shook his head. I always thought faith was for the weak or the desperate. But then, He said something that made me stop dead in my tracks. People might turn their backs on you, but God won't. Just 10 words. But they cut through the noise like an arrow straight to my chest. I stood there in the middle of the crowd, sweat trickling down my back, vendors hawking their wares on either side. But I only heard one thing: God won't turn his back. I don't know why those words hit me so hard. Maybe because I've been turned away from so much. My wife, my family, friends, even myself. I'd turned my back on myself too. I had gone a long, long way around, trying to escape the feeling that I wasn't worthy of love. And now, a stranger was saying, maybe there was still someone who hadn't given up on me. I don't remember the rest of the sermon. I just know I stood perfectly still for 15 minutes. Didn't move. Didn't breathe heavily, as if any other action would make the moment dissolve. When he finished, he closed the book, stepped down from the crate, and smiled at the people around him. A few patted his shoulder. A few nodded and walked on. No one cried. No one shouted. There was just a strange sense of peace, something I'd forgotten existed. I didn't talk to him. I just backed away, turned, and ducked into a small alley. My steps felt lighter than before, as if something tight in my chest had been loosened. An invisible noose eased by one knot. That evening, back in my room, I sat by the window. Outside, the streetlights were still the same dim yellow. But the light didn't seem harsh tonight. It was soft, just enough to see things without being blinding. I opened a drawer, rummaged around, and found the tiny Bible my mom had given me before my wedding. I hadn't opened it in 12 years. The first page still had her handwriting: "Wherever you are, God is with you." I turned on the desk lamp, flipped open to a random page. Didn't understand much, but I read, quietly, line by line. And then I closed my eyes, placed a hand on my chest, and whispered my first prayer in 20 years. I didn't ask for my bank account to be refilled. I didn't ask for Natalie to come back. I didn't ask why everything had happened. I just said, "If you're there, please don't let me disappear." A simple sentence, but truer than anything I had ever said. That night, I slept. For the first time in months, I actually slept. No nightmares. No yoltingewak. No tears soaking the pillow. Just peaceful sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, the sun still rose. The world was still chaotic. I was still poor. Still unemployed. But I knew one thing for sure. I hadn't disappeared. I was still here. And somewhere, maybe God was too. I didn't wake up the next morning feeling like everything's going to be okay. It wasn't some glorious, movie-like revival. No miracles. No unexpected phone call about winning the lottery. Just the light filtering through the old curtain and the sound of the bus pulling up at the nearby stop. But for the first time in months, I woke up without that heavy weight in my chest. I sat up, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The face was still tired, but something was different. A look that wasn't giving up anymore. I put on an old button-down shirt, the one I wore to my first job interview years ago, and walked outside. I wasn't aiming to reclaim my reputation. I wasn't thinking about proving anything anymore. I just needed a job. Any job. That morning, I walked past a small diner near the flea market. The back kitchen door was open, and a woman was struggling to carry in crates of vegetables. I walked in, asked if they needed a dishwasher. She looked me up and down, then sighed. "You know how to wash dishes?" I nodded. And just like that, I started. My first shift was 8 hours long. Cold water, greasy pans, the smell of garlic, fish, dish soap, all mingling into the unique aroma of a kitchen corner. My back ached. My fingers were pruny like salted pork skin. But I felt like I was doing something real. No longer chasing numbers. No longer trying to predict charts. Just standing there, washing each plate clean, then stacking it on the shelf. One by one. That night, I went back to my room with a bag of leftover food from the kitchen. The owner, the woman said, "Eat up, get strong, more work tomorrow." It was the best meal I'd had in months. Not because of the taste, but because for the first time, I felt like I deserved it. I worked there for 3 weeks, then moved on to a small electrical repair shop. A mechanic, maybe 50 years old, hired me after seeing me cleaning up the parking lot without being asked. He didn't ask about my past, didn't promise anything, just handed me a wrench and said, "If it's broken, fix it." Manual labor didn't make me feel degraded. Actually, I found myself again in the grease stains, in the turn of a bolt. I relearned how to feel the world through my hands, not through my bank account. I lived frugally, deposited every spare dollar into a separate account, like rebuilding from the very first bricks. Nobody knew I used to invest. Nobody knew I'd lost everything. And that was a relief. I didn't have to explain. Didn't have to wear a mask. After work, I started reading again. Not stock market books. Books about electronics, automation, robotics. Things I studied in college. Things I loved before getting sucked into the get-rich-quick game. I borrowed books from the city library, took notes, tinkered on my old laptop, the only thing I'd kept from my old life. 3 months later, I managed to build a mini robotic arm using simple sensors. Nobody saw it, but I watched it move, lift a small bundle of wires, and I smiled. A real smile. It had nothing to do with money. That winter, I got a small bonus from the shop. I used it to buy an Arduino kit and some basic tools. My tiny room became both my bedroom and a mini lab. Every night, I'd sit on the floor, the desk lamp casting shadows on the ceiling, working on things only I understood. A year later, I got a license to open a small business for repairing and designing simple electrical devices. Not big, not fancy, but it was mine. I named it Genesis 3, Chapter 3 of Genesis, where humans leave the garden, beginning a life of sweat and tears, but also the possibility of redemption. I rented a corner of an abandoned warehouse behind the old market. At first, it was just me, a table, a few tools, and maybe 2 customers a week. But I was patient, did things right, did them solid. No rusing. Another year passed. I hired help. A young man recovering from addiction. An older guy who'd been unemployed for years. Both had been turned away elsewhere. But at my place, they had value. No one had to prove anything. Just be willing to learn and work. And just like that, starting from the smallest things, washing dishes, mopping floors, tightening screws, I rebuilt myself. No one recognized me on the street. No one knew I'd gone bankrupt, been abandoned, asked God through tears, am I anything anymore? Now, I didn't need the answer, because everything I did every day was the answer. I didn't want to go back to the past anymore. I just wanted to keep moving forward, slowly, but steadily. It was a normal Tuesday. Overcast sky, clouds drifting slowly, the smell of rain in the air. I was wiping down my electrical tools after a repair job when a car pulled up outside. A new model SUV. Black, shiny, so clean it reflected the gray sky above. The door opened, and a man stepped out wearing a suit, polished leather shoes, holding a tablet. I recognized him immediately. He was the one who fired me 5 years ago. When I went to his office in my neat suit, carrying a proposal to overhaul the system, he didn't let me present. Just said one sentence. We've decided to cut mid-level staff. Then signed the papers. Never once looked me in the eye. Now he was standing in front of my workshop, looking around hesitantly. I walked out, not rushing, not smiling either. "Lucas," he said. His voice was a bit hoarse. Sounded like he'd been through a lot of tense meetings. I nodded. "Come on in." I got hot coffee. We sat at my old workbench in a room that smelled of wood, machine oil, and the steady ticking of the wall clock. He said his company was expanding a new branch, needed a team to design an applied electronic system for their production line. One of their partners had recommended me. I listened, took notes, showed no reaction, just acted the way I always wished people had treated me. Professionally, politely, without prejudice. When he left, I shook his hand. It was the same firm handshake I'd received years ago. But this time, I didn't feel small anymore. A few weeks later, I received the official contract. It wasn't huge, but it was enough for me to upgrade some equipment and hire 2 more technicians. One late weekend afternoon, I was inspecting a circuit board when I heard my name called from behind. I turned around. Natalie. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, her hair tied back neatly. Her face was makeup-free but still startlingly familiar. Probably because I once knew every line of it like the back of my hand. "I saw your name in the local paper," she said. I didn't think. I really didn't think. I invited her inside, made 2 cups of tea. We sat at the wooden table, like people who were once close but were now strangers. She told me that after the divorce, she moved to another state, tried starting a business with an acquaintance. It didn't work out. Went through a few relationships, a few failures, and finally realized she had left behind something she shouldn't have lost. I listened silently, not because I was angry, but because, within me, All resentment had fallen away long ago. She looked at me. Her eyes were still beautiful, but not sharp like before. Softer, more honest. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for what I did, but because I didn't believe you could get back up." I looked at her and said slowly, "You don't need to apologize. Because honestly, it was only when you left that I had the chance to face myself." She lowered her head, then stood up, asked to leave. I walked her to the door. Before getting in her car, she turned back. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm not okay, but I'm living. More truly than ever before." The car rolled away slowly, disappearing around the bend. I stood there alone in the late afternoon sun slanting across the workshop yard, golden and quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt light. Forgiveness isn't about making yourself look magnanimous. It's about freeing yourself from being trapped in your own past. That was a kind of victory. Silent, but real. The little church sits at the end of the street, past the used bookstore and the gas station that shut down years ago. Every Friday afternoon, I go there, carrying my toolbox and some printouts teaching basic electronics. The classroom has no blackboard, no microphone, just a few folding chairs, a long table, and the afternoon sun filtering through the deep yellow stained glass window. I don't teach for money. I don't teach to be called successful. I just share what I tinkered with in that tiny rented room. With people walking the same path I once stumbled down, they're quiet men, like I used to be. Some were mechanics, some recently released from prison, some just lost their jobs, their wives, all their confidence. Each carries an invisible crack, but when they connect a simple circuit, making that first light bulb glow, their eyes light up too, not because of the bulb, but because they just started believing in something within themselves again. I often start the class with a simple sentence. "I'm no better than anyone here. I've just stood where you're standing now." And I believe sometimes just hearing someone say that is enough. After class, I usually sit alone in the empty room, cleaning tools, folding papers, watching the sun fade behind the stained glass. Every time, old memories flood back. My father's disappointed look, Natalie walking out with the suitcase, the ringing phone from the bank, the first night in that cold, empty room. But now, those images don't hurt anymore. They're like a movie I've already seen. I watched it to the end and don't need to rewind. I used to think I had to succeed to prove something to the world. Now I understand. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. And maybe the moment I stopped trying to prove myself was the moment I started truly living. I stand up, lock the church door, and step out onto the street. A gentle breeze blows, carrying the smell of wood and earth. A peaceful evening, no applause, no cheers, just my footsteps and the quiet belief still burning steadily in my chest. I once lost everything, but now I have back the most important thing, peace, and the belief that sometimes failure isn't the end. It's just a pause to learn how to listen to life again.